John. It's real exciting for me to have the opportunity today to introduce to you a friend of mine, Rick Reames. Rick is the director of the South Carolina Department of Revenue. The South Carolina Department of Revenue has over 800 employees across the state. The main office here in Columbia is located on Bush River, off Bush River Road at I-20. Rick was appointed to this position last summer in July of 2014 by our governor. You'll no doubt remember the cyber attack and the issues that happened with the data breach. That was late October 2012, well before Rick was appointed into the role he now holds. Prior to the Department of Revenue, Rick worked for 15 years in Columbia in private practice as a lawyer and partner at Nexen Pruitt. And he primarily worked with local and multi-state businesses in areas of tax planning, offering guidance and advice from a tax perspective. His efforts focused on economic development incentives as well as tax policy. Rick is a Wofford graduate, another member of the Wofford Mafia here today, and his wife Elizabeth is also a Wofford graduate. After Wofford, he obtained his law degree from the University of South Carolina, and he also obtained a Master of Laws in Taxation from New York University School of Law. He's a member of the South Carolina Coordinating Council for Economic Development and chair of the Enterprise Zone Committee. He also serves on the State Board of Economic Advisors. Rick is one of 22 fellows selected for the Liberty Fellowship Class of 2016, a program that seeks to promote outstanding leadership across the state of South Carolina. Previously served as a delegate to the South Carolina Bar House of Governors and is chair of both the joint North Carolina-South Carolina Tax Conference and the South Carolina Bar Association Tax Section. Rick is originally from Florence. He and his wife Elizabeth live in Columbia and are raising 3 children. Rick is an outdoorsman. He's into hunting and fishing, and somehow has become a Clemson fan over those many years. At any rate, ladies and gentlemen of Columbia Rotary, please welcome my friend, Rick Reames.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. I'm always happy to share what's going on at the Department of Revenue, so that's one reason that I'm glad to be here. Another reason I'm glad to be here is all of the friends and former clients, and I even see some former law partners in the room here. I was talking to Hal Stevenson. I understand that Hal is a Wofford graduate, John is a Wofford graduate, Mark is a Wofford graduate, so Hal tells me that the cream has risen to the top of Columbia Rotary. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Department of Revenue. First, I'm going to talk about, give you a little bit of background about myself, not because I want to talk about me, but because my background will give you a little bit of perspective on my thoughts for the agency. Then I'll tell you a little bit about what the Department of Revenue does. Most people have no idea what the Department of Revenue does other than you mail your taxes in there. And then I'll tell you some specific things that we have going on at the Department of Revenue that we're excited about. I promise I won't talk too long. No one wants to listen to a tax collector talk longer than you have to. But again, thank you for having me. I'll tell you, I was in private practice at Nexen Pruitt for almost 15 years. I was a tax lawyer, as Mark said. I represented taxpayers. I got great joy out of keeping money out of the hands of the government. And so when the governor called me and asked me to come take over the Department of Revenue, I said, Governor, I've got a philosophical problem doing what you're asking me to do. I keep money out of the hands of the government. I'm not into helping it collect money. Nevertheless, I finally agreed to take the job, but there was some back and forth before I took it over. And a quick funny story on that before I get going too much. I had been at my law firm for, like I said, almost 15 years. And when I decided to finally make the move and cross sides to the government, so to speak, Elizabeth, my wife who's here, we have 3 children, and their ages 10, 8, and 8. That's 3 within 24 months for those of you who are doing the math. But we decided we needed to tell them that I was going to change jobs because they are 10, 8, and 8, and I had been at the law firm for their whole life. And so we're sitting around the dinner table, and it's a round table, and we're having dinner, and I explained to them that I'm changing jobs and going to work for the Department of Revenue, and they immediately say, well, what in the world is that? And I explained that it's the government agency that collects taxes. And you would have thought that I told him I was going to work for Satan himself. There's an uprising of how can you do that? That's not fair. How can you take their money? That's their money. They earned it. And so I'm taking, I see some, these are 10 and 8, by the way, 10 years old and 8 years old. So it's occurred to me that maybe I've been a little vocal in my anti-government rhetoric over the years. But anyway, so I give them the standard line that everyone seems to use, that no, they have it wrong, that it's my job to ensure fairness, and if one person doesn't pay their fair share, then that leaves the burden on everybody else, and they seem to buy this line, and it kind of quiets the revolt. And dinner kind of breaks up, and everybody goes about their business. And my youngest daughter, who some of you know, is a bit of a spitfire, and she's still sitting at the table, and she's looking at me kind of with her head cocked like that, and his eyes really big. And so I say, Caroline, what's wrong? And she says, and she just deadpans it, she says, tax collector, how are you going to sleep at night? So I roll into the Department of Revenue with that kind of support and enthusiasm at my house. So anyway, I tell that because it's a funny story, and it's actually a better story than it was when it happened, because there was chaos, as there is with 3 children going different directions, and so it comes out better than it really did, but it is true. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of perspective on me and what my feelings are about the Department of Revenue. I'll tell you a little bit about the department because most people, again, don't know much about it. It's a cabinet agency of the governor, which means that as the director, I'm appointed as the head, and I have to be confirmed by the Senate. I was actually appointed in July of 2014 when the Senate was out of session, and so I haven't gone through confirmation yet. I'm in the midst of that right now. I had a subcommittee hearing last week and have a full committee hearing tomorrow, I think tomorrow at least. And so hopefully I can remove the term interim from my title, because I'm interim because I have not yet gone through confirmation. And again, that was solely because the Senate was not in session, so hopefully we'll fix that soon. The Department of Revenue as a cabinet agency is the chief tax collecting agency in the state. And first and foremost, it collects really the vast majority of money on which the state government runs. And so last year, that was almost $9 billion. So $9 billion rolls through our agency. We have about 800 employees. The majority of them process that money and get it to the right place. And everything that we do is designed to ensure voluntary compliance with that system. And the theory, going back to what I told my children, if everyone pays what they are supposed to with the existing system, then theoretically the legislature doesn't have to raise taxes on anyone else, and you can keep the burden as low as possible on everybody, which everybody is all for, as evidenced by the round of applause that you gave the lines that my children used. So that's really what we do. The collections are broken into 2 categories: general fund money and then what we call other funds. General funds are the money that the legislature spends. So when you pay your individual income tax, it comes into the Department of Revenue. That money really gets sent to an account where the General Assembly appropriates that money and spends it on hiring highway patrolmen and funding education and doing all of the things that government does. That was about $6.3 billion last year. Out of the general fund, about 47% of it is individual income taxes. That's all the taxes that y'all pay on an annual basis. And then 40% of it is sales and use tax. And then that leaves 13% that is comprised of all the miscellaneous taxes that the government has imposed on all of us. So that's kind of the rough breakdown. The other thing, the other slug of money that the Department of Revenue collects is called other funds. That is money that goes back to the local level. So when you go into a store and buy a product and the vendor charges you sales tax, a portion of that sales tax is general fund money and a portion goes back to the local level. You're probably familiar with local option sales tax or the penny transportation tax that was passed. That money all goes back to the local level, and that's about $2.5 billion. It's all sent to us. We process it and send it back to the local level because local government doesn't have the ability and the technology and the infrastructure to do that. So that's kind of the first thing when you think about the Department of Revenue that you think about is collecting that money so that the government can run. We collect about 98% of what the state runs on. Another thing that the Department of Revenue does that many people do not know is that it regulates and licenses alcohol. And South Carolinians love their alcohol, and that's a big job. And so it probably goes back to the days of the revenuers, where you had the state revenue department running the alcohol, and the bootleggers would try to run around the revenuers. That's what that is. In South Carolina, SLED, State Law Enforcement Division, actually enforces the law, and we license and regulate it. So if your bar sells to an underage individual, SLED's going to go in and write them a ticket, but it's going to come to us for prosecution for our lawyers, and we have one of our lawyers here. So alcohol is a big part of what the Department of Revenue does, and tends to take up a lot of time. We have a large ABL section, as we call it, alcohol beverage licensing. Another thing that the Department of Revenue does is criminal enforcement. So we actually have a number of licensed law enforcement officers with guns and badges and blue lights in their cars, and they investigate and pursue tax evasion. And again, we don't want to arrest people just to arrest them. We want to arrest them when they are cheating so that we can achieve voluntary compliance with the existing laws. If we can achieve voluntary compliance, again, theoretically, our General Assembly doesn't have to raise taxes on everybody else. And so criminal enforcement is a part of what we did. We arrested a month or so ago an individual in upstate who had made $5 or $6 million over a number of years and never filed a tax return at all. He was what we would call a tax protester who thinks that paying taxes is unconstitutional. None of us like it. He took it to another extreme and got arrested for it. So those are kind of big picture things that the Department of Revenue does. I was hired after, well, not after the data breach. It was after the data breach, but it was not directly a result of the data breach that occurred in the fall of 2012. My predecessor was a gentleman named Bill Bloom, who was hired to focus on cybersecurity and internal operations. I was hired as a succession plan to him to continue to build on what he did, but also to push the agency forward from that data breach. And so part of the governor's plan and my plan was to use private sector experience, because I did represent taxpayers primarily against the South Carolina Department of Revenue and other departments of revenue around the country, but to use that private sector experience to push the agency forward. And so in many ways, what we're trying to do is build private sector values into the agency so that when we're doing the public service that we have, we're using private sector values and doing the same things that all of you would do in your business. And that's sometimes a novel approach in government because it doesn't always work that way. So one of the things that we are doing is we've always got to focus on security, and going forward that's going to continue to be woven into the fabric of the agency. It's just part of what we have to deal with on a daily basis, and so that continues to be a big priority. A second thing that we are focusing on to move forward from that data breach would be to focus on customer service and responsiveness of our people. Again, trying to use private sector values in the business of public service, and I'll talk about some specific examples in a minute because that sounds a little bit like a line, but we are actually trying to put it into practice. And then the third thing that we're trying to do is hold our people accountable for those first two values. And so that's not always as easy to do in the public world as it is in the private world. It's difficult to measure things in government, and we're trying hard to do that. So some specific things that we are doing on those lines as far as accountability and measurements and responsiveness. For the first time in at least a long time, we are actually measuring how long it takes us to do things and working off of those numbers to try to improve service. I started asking some questions about how long it took to do things, and you got blank stares, and they hadn't thought that way in a number of years. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to do. I'll give you a specific example. When I was in private practice, one of the things that I did was request and obtain tax compliance certificates for businesses. What that is a bill of clean health when you're buying another business. So if you're buying one of your competitors, you'll request from the Department of Revenue a tax compliance certificate, which basically tells you that you're not inheriting a bunch of unknown tax liabilities. Well, it used to take on a good day 3 weeks, and on a bad one 6 weeks to do that. And so when I got involved, I started asking what our process was and how long it took to issue those certificates. And the answer I got back was it took 1 day. And I said, well, that's interesting because I used to do it and it used to take 3 weeks on a good day. And so part of it was that our people were looking at that process with blinders on and not realizing that there was an entire process on the front end and an entire process on the back end that was slowing that down. So very simply, we just streamlined that process. And we're down, I want to say we're down to 48 hours on that, but it's probably more like 72. We'll keep working toward 48. It was not a very, very difficult thing to fix. It was just a matter of recognizing it as an issue and thinking outside the box to create it, to create a solution. Another thing that we are doing is what we have done is pull the plug on an in-house development of a tax processing system. So for many, many years, the Department of Revenue was showing up and had teams and teams of software developers that were developing their own in-house tax processing system. It was failing miserably. They were always behind, they were spending too much money, and it was never keeping up with the private market. And so what we did was we pulled the plug on that and have purchased an off-the-shelf product that's proven in 20 other states, and we're in the middle of implementing that. And again, that was just recognizing that the private market can do something better than government and making that change. Now, in defense of earlier administrations, and I saw my friend Bernie Maybank here, but it looks like he walked out in the middle of my talk, which I will get on him about. Earlier administrations, there was not a proven off-the-shelf product. The market wasn't as mature as it is now. So I'd like to take all the credit for that, but it's not all the credit. But we do feel that it's the right thing to do. We developed a new website. Many people have seen it. It's not perfect yet, but it's a vast improvement on the prior one. The prior one was probably cutting edge in 99, 2000. And we have modernized that greatly and feel good about that. It's still a work in process. We've got a bunch more to do. By no means are we finished. But we feel like things are headed in the right direction, and we're excited about where we're going when we try to use these private sector values and incorporate them into the business of public service. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I know we're running ahead of schedule, which I'm sure y'all are glad about. I will take questions if there are any. Sometimes people don't, I already see them. Sometimes people don't have questions for the tax man, but it looks like we do. Get this. Yeah.
My name is not.
Just leave your business card down here.
I help some of my less technically capable friends do their tax returns, and I was doing that this weekend. And I just was, go through, do the tax return, you get the software now, it's easy and all that, and get ready to file returns. And you file the federal return, and it's free, everything's easy, that's great. And then it comes time to file a state return, and it costs $34.50. To which they reply, oh, hell no, just print out the return and mail it in to you. It's going to cost you more than $34.50 to process. Why? What? Is that your expense, or is that H&R Block's? Where's that $34.50?
I mean, I think what that is that's, all the third-party independent private tax software saying that they let you prepare your return for free. Well, they let you prepare your federal return for free, and then they make money off of you on the state return. And the state returns, of course, have to be customized. There's 50 of those, and there's one federal one. So they have more investment and infrastructure costs in the state returns, and that's how they are capturing money from their customers. I'll tell you that it clearly does help us save money when people file electronically. We receive about 92% of our returns electronically filed. And that's, I think, either third or fourth in the country in number of electronic returns filed. And so that's something we want to continue to encourage. Now, there is sometimes a cost to the consumer for that, but that cost is a direct result of private companies making money. Right here up front.
How many and to what degree did the security breach, how many people did it affect, and what amount of money did it affect, did it cost?
So it was...
What's the question, Rick?
Yeah, sure, I'll repeat the question. So the question was the security breach that occurred in the fall of 2012, which my friend Mark Sullivan indicated I was not at the department for. Let's make sure we're all on the same page there. How many people did it affect, and what was the dollar cost involved. It was over 6 million individuals were compromised. That was one of the first large data breaches of recent memory. If you'll notice, if you read the Wall Street Journal or pay attention to the news, almost every private company in the country, it seems, has been breached since then. But it was one of the first ones that was highly visible and well known. As for a dollar amount, we're not aware of anyone losing their data as a result of the data breach. Mark Keel, who was the head of SLED, is a friend of mine, and he told me the other day they don't have a single case. Now, that's not to say that someone won't lose their identity as a result of the breach. It's almost impossible to quantify because there's been so many breaches elsewhere. And if you do have your identity stolen, was it stolen because your doctor's office took down your social security number and they wrote it on a pad and took it home? Was it a result of Home Depot? Was it a result of Target? Was it the Department of Revenue? It's almost impossible to quantify. Unfortunately, this is just the new reality in which we live in the modern world. It's going to continue to happen. Back here.
With that, how secure is the database now? How good do you feel about preventing any other breaches?
So the question was, how secure is the database, and how do we feel about future breaches? I'll tell you that it is significantly more secure than it was in 2012. As I just said, this is a continuing problem, and security is something that has to be a continuous evolution. You have to weave it into the fabric of your organization. It's not going to go away. It's not a one-time fix and then you stop worrying about it. It's constant. I'm not going to predict that we're not going to have another data breach. I'll tell you that we're doing everything we can to prevent it. And I can talk in more detail about that for anyone who wants to hear it afterwards. But we're doing a lot of things and have been since the data breach, to the point that it makes operating the agency difficult because you have security hurdles to overcome and you have a constant tension between security and operations. Back here.
How many employees do you have that work in your area?
So the question is, how many employees do we have and work in my area? So the Department of Revenue has about 800 employees. And if you're asking about me, I have 9 direct reports, the majority of whom are division heads, and then it spirals down from that point. We do have, talking about security structure, we do have the Chief Information Security Officer. It's called a CISO in the business, which many of you may know. It reports directly to the director. That was one of the changes that was made after the data breach, because we need that individual serving in an autonomous role rather than being subservient to the operational functions of the agency. So he is one of the 9 direct reports.
What percent of your total income is gasoline tax?
I don't know the total percentage. I'll tell you that the gasoline tax is one of those other funds. It's not general fund money because it's allocated almost exclusively to road funding to the Department of Transportation. It's about $500 million a year. A small portion of that goes to DHEC for underground storage tanks, and I think the Department of Natural Resources gets a very small portion of that for paving boat ramps. The vast majority of the gas tax goes to the Department of Transportation for road funding, and it's about $500 million a year.
But if you're going to lower that and lower the income tax and raise that, how do you offset the lowering of the income tax with the gas tax, since it's not general fund money?
It's a very good question, and that is an issue anytime you're doing tax reform. If tax reform is cutting taxes, then you've got to cut spending or raise taxes elsewhere. Under the governor's plan, the raising of taxes is earmarked for road funding because there's an immediate infrastructure need. I'll tell you the reason for the income tax cut is because South Carolina has the highest income tax in the South and the 12th highest in the country. If you look at a map of the country and you see the individual income tax rate written within the state borders, it's hard to find one higher than South Carolina. And I did that about a week ago. I looked at it, and it takes you a while. You know who is higher is New Jersey and New York and California. So the income tax plan is a direct result of trying to be more competitive with our sister states. Saw one back here, George.
Rick, just a theoretical question, but as Department of Revenue, you guys would have, I would think, a great deal of influence with the federal government, talking about the states in general. Federal government's goal, primary role is to protect the citizen, both militarily, and as far as I'm concerned, in terms of your identity being stolen. What pressure is being put on these idiots in Washington to do that?
George Roper wants to know what pressure is being put on the idiots in Washington. And I think he led off with, I have a great deal of influence on the federal government. I can assure you I do not. I don't know that anybody has a great deal
I
of
meant
influence.
the revenue departments themselves.
Yeah, I still don't know that I would say that, George. You know, I mean, the question is, do you want a federal solution to anything, right? You know, I'll tell you that cybersecurity is a problem everywhere. The federal government has been breached, the Pentagon has been breached, the White House was breached. The IRS, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the IRS can tell you how much fraud results from individual income tax filings, and it is staggering. It is a staggering amount of fraud, and that's something that we hope to begin to address on the state level in the future, is fraud, fraudulent income tax filings. Over here.
There was an article, I believe it was this morning's paper, about tax collection and the governor's suggestions for dealing with that. And as I recall, the Department of Revenue was mentioned among those. Could you just comment
Sure.
and help us?
Sure, and so that was an Associated Press article which was picked up by a number of outlets, and the gist of the article is the amount of accounts receivable, that is the debt that state agencies have, and it's a large number. And so the Department of Revenue has two collection techniques that state agencies can enroll in. Local governments can enroll in too, and the Department of Revenue will collect these debts for these agencies when these agencies enroll. It's more or less so if one of you owes, let's say DHEC, for example, a DHEC fine, you never paid it, and you're owed a state income tax refund, if DHEC enrolls in this program, we will send DHEC the fine that you owed them out of your tax refund. That's kind of the concept of one of these programs. The Department of Revenue has its own debts that it tries to collect, but it's almost all state tax money. The program that you read about is designed to collect fees and fines for local government and for state agencies. And very simply, the Department of Revenue has some collection techniques that it can assist those agencies with. So that's what you read about. Back here?
How do you sleep at night?
You know, I thought I was going to work for the government and I would have an easy job and sleep much better, but I'm not.
I experienced this week, I guess your new customer service program, the guy called looking for a dormant company we had, why we had to file taxes. Very nice, and usually I would call like that, I called him right back and said non-threatening, so it seems to be working.
Good, thank you. We generally hear complaints, not compliments, so I like hearing good feedback. Over here.
I want to compliment you and your wife on the intelligence of your children, first of all.
Came all from my wife.
Let me tell you, I've heard this hokum about how we have a voluntary tax system, tax collection system, for years and years and years. And I'd like to hear from a tax man just exactly what a compulsory system would look like.
I think a compulsory system would we arrest everybody here if they don't pay it, and we just don't have the resources to do that. It's a fair question. The vast majority of money is collected on a voluntary basis, which is what that means. Right here beside you.
Is there a way to quantify who pays the gas tax in-state versus out-of-state?
You know, I don't have that in front of me. You know, the tourism folks can run numbers, and the BEA, which is the Board of Economic Advisors, can crunch numbers. They base all of those studies on data from other agencies. So it's to some extent a forecast, not something. It is an absolute forecast. That is one of the attractions to a gas tax to some people, is that it can be paid by out-of-state residents, and that it's a consumption tax rather than a mandatory tax. If you don't want to pay it, you just drive less, right? But I don't have the percentages. Jim?
Deed stamps, transfer fees, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
You collect those?
Those go directly to the county as part of real estate transactions.
To the county.
You can't blame me for those.
My next question. Have you worked any on, we run into a problem when we have tax liens on property and trying to get some type of payoff or a proportionate payoff. And I know the Internal Revenue Service, I've been working on one now, that, I mean, they won't even tell you when they'll give you a proportionate payoff. How are you handling that through the state?
So what you're talking, so the question is, how are we handling paying off tax liens and unpaid liabilities as part of a payment plan, is what it sounded like. So that's called an installment agreement, and we regularly enter into those. Now, what we don't want to do is enter into an installment agreement for every taxpayer just because they need more, or just because they want more time to pay it. That goes toward our voluntary compliance and being fair to everybody. Now, I will tell you that we try to accommodate requests when they're made, and we regularly do those a lot. I used to do them as part of private practice. I saw a question over here. Yep.
What's the current status of sales tax on internet purchases, and where would you see that going forward, changing?
So the question is sales taxation on internet purchases, which is a big issue nationally. That's to sum it up very, very quickly without killing y'all with tax law, is that an out-of-state seller who has no physical presence in the state of South Carolina, the state does not have jurisdiction to tax that company because they don't have sufficient contacts with the state of South Carolina to provide jurisdiction for our enforcement activities. And so those out-of-state sellers don't collect sales tax when they sell to you. Now, I will tell you that since 1951, there has been something called the use tax, which is a backup to the sales tax. So even if you buy from LL Bean, for example, and they don't collect sales tax from you, and they ship you your fleece pullover, you're supposed to, on your individual income tax return, pay the use tax attributable to that. That when you use it in the state, that's a backstop to the sales tax. That has been around since 1951. Almost no one even knows about it. Amazon started sending notices of how much money you have bought from Amazon, and that has prompted a lot of questions like yours. You see in Congress continuing discussion about a national fix for that problem. In other words, force the jurisdiction. That's a federal and a state issue. I mean, you know, at what point do states' rights stop and the federal government intercedes? And that's why you haven't seen a national solution. It's a difficult issue. There has been legislation enacted in South Carolina each of the last several years to address it. I don't see it passing. In the middle?
Yeah, a few years back, you were reading a lot about comprehensive tax reform.
Mm-hmm.
It was always in the state paper all the time. Your politicians talk about it. It's pretty much gone now. Is that? I mean, there's no political will, I guess, for that. You want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, tax reform is a generic term, and
comprehensive, instead of raising one, lowering the other.
Right. So in 2006, there was a commission started called the TRAC Commission, or Tax Realignment Commission. Bernie Maybank, who again left in the middle of my talk, was the chairman. And I would defer that question to him if he was here, so I'll call him afterwards and tell him to call you. But that went nowhere. None of it was enacted. And the difficulty is the entrenched special interest exemptions. When you hear about tax reform, you hear about broadening the base. What broadening the base means is repealing exemptions and lower the rate. So you have fewer special interest loopholes.